DND number 9, The Circle of Life, in Jesus' name, Chapter 4. It's March 31st, Sunday, in the wee hours of the morning, the Keno Estate, Crystal Cove, California. The black SUV, the black SUV hybrid had already been buzzed through the gate of the Keno Estate. It pulled up to the front of the house in the wee hours of Sunday morning. Eric Keno met the car, opened the back door, and peered in. He had to smile. Gabriel Tanner sat in the middle, his arms around the Davis boys. All three of them were sound asleep. They hadn't even stirred when the door opened. He hated to have to wake them. "Hey, guys," he said softly. Gabe drew a breath and sat up quickly. "Oh, sorry, Grandmaster Keno. I must have fallen asleep." "Well, with good reason." The boys woke. "Come on, guys. Let's get you inside," Eric said. The boys climbed out and headed up the front steps. Gabe stood in front of Eric and bowed. Eric smiled and returned the gesture of honor. It was a tradition between them, since Gabriel had been big enough to stand. Gabe then went back to the back of the vehicle and unloaded the bags onto the drive. Eric shook the hand of Jason's driver, which he always took time to do, and watched him pull away. He turned and helped Gabe carry luggage and gun bags into the house. Shelley stood in the foyer, her sweet voice welcoming the boys and taking them up to the blue room, which was right next to the Keno's own room. She tucked them into bed and told them to sleep in as long as they wanted, and when they woke up to come find her, and she would cook them the biggest breakfast ever. She then headed back downstairs to find her husband and Gabe sitting in the kitchen, talking softly. She recognized a debriefing/counseling session taking place. "I'll leave you guys to talk," she said, "but before I do, can I get you anything?" Eric extended his hand, and she came and placed her hand in his, and he raised it to his lips and kissed her softly. "Nothing for me, Shelley girl. What about you, young man?" I could use some water," he admitted. Shelley grabbed a cold bottle out of the refrigerator and placed it in front of him. She then kissed his cheek and headed back upstairs. Eric eyed the young man sitting across from him. He felt a connection to him. He always had. He knew Gabriel Tanner was supposed to be in his life. Eric held his father in high esteem. He loved his mother and sisters with a powerful love. He called them his angels. Keegan did the same. "It's been a rough couple of days, huh?" Eric began. Gabe nodded. "Not too bad. I'm just a little tired. I'm just glad the Davises are going to be okay." "Me too. I guess you're a little disappointed that your vacation was cut short." Gabe frowned in confusion. Like, I'm still on vacation. It's the Davises who are getting the bad deal." Eric smiled. "Well, don't worry. Jason will make it up to them." "You want to talk about anything?" Gabe blinked as he thought about all the things running through his brain. There was something about Grandmaster Keno that made Gabe feel so at ease and so relaxed. He had a strength about him that just made you feel completely, he didn't even know what to call it. Confident? If you were in the room with him, you just somehow knew all is well. When Gabe didn't answer, Eric patted his hand. "I know you were hoping to get in some shooting. There's a shooting range not far from here. Why don't we head there tomorrow morning and you and the boys show me what you can do? It's been a while since I've been shooting. Maybe you can help me brush up on my skills." Gabe's mouth opened in surprise. I didn't know you could shoot." Eric laughed. "Well, there's probably a lot you don't know about me, I admit. The weapons I'm most proficient in are more like knives and swords and nunchucks and bow staffs. You help me brush up on shooting, and I'll help you brush up on a few of those. Deal?" "Sounds awesome." "I'm sure Ricky and young Eric would like to join us, maybe Mark and his boys." Gabe grinned. "That would be great." Eric glanced at the clock. It was almost 5 in the morning. "You want to try to get a few hours of sleep?" "Well, I'm not sure if I can." "Well, then, would you like to join us on the beach for our morning workout?" Gabe had heard from his father and from Jeff that when Grandmaster Keno invited you to join his morning ritual, you did not turn him down. "Yes, sir. I would be honored." Eric nodded with a smile. "Well, go change clothes, and I'll meet you down there." New scene. March 31st still, Sunday, early afternoon, Keno Estate, Crystal Cove, California. Gabriel woke with a start when his phone rang. He'd been lying on a lounge chair by the pool. After the early morning workout with Grandmaster Keno and his wife, Gabe had been more tired than he'd ever been. Even his football workouts didn't break him like he'd been broken this morning. No wonder the Kenos, though in their 60s, had the bodies of people in their 40s or even 30s. They were amazing. And to add to that, after the workout, they'd showered and dressed, fed the Davis boys breakfast, and headed to church. They'd apologized that they had to leave, but Eric had been asked to speak, and he doesn't like to turn down those opportunities to bear his testimony that Jesus lives. After Gabe's workout with the Kenos, the rest of the day had been spent relaxing and watching over Daniel and Jeremy. Grandmaster Keno said Gabe was still recovering from jet lag and told him to relax the rest of the day. No problem for Gabe. Once the Kenos returned from church, the rest of their family began to arrive. Jeffy and her husband Cameron, Ricky and Bree and their kids, Mark and Bella and their kids, Joey and Breeze and their kids, Jason and Angel Lee, and their daughter Kimmy and her husband Jensen Deal. With so many people to watch the boys, he'd allowed himself to relax. Next thing he knew, the phone woke him up. He glanced at it before he answered. "Hey, Peyton, how's it going?" "Not bad. Boring without you around. Picked up more hours at the steakhouse since there was nothing else to do. So how's your vacation going?" Gabe laughed. "Not like I thought it would." He filled his friend in on what had taken place and where he currently was and what the plans were for tomorrow. "Wow, man, you are so lucky. It's so cool that you know Ricky Keno. You know, you could invite me sometime to come out there with you." "So, how's the setup there? I bet it's pretty nice." "FaceTime me, and I'll show you," Gabe said. Gabe's phone rang again, and he pointed the phone at the house. "So, there's the house up there and the upper deck. That's Grandmaster Keno talking to his wife. And next to them is Jason Lee, who's my dad's boss, and his wife." He turned the phone toward the pool area. "Here's the pool. That's Ricky Keno playing with the little ones, and his wife is just coming up the pool steps. Those guys over there are Ricky Keno's son and his cousins." He turned the phone. "That's the pool house, and that's a bar. And that's Cam Wallace, the one who rescued Jeffy Keno from Africa a few years ago. He married her." He turned the phone west. "Down there is the volleyball court, and there's the ocean, and that's Mark and Joey Adams walking down there with their wives." He turned the phone slowly around. "Whoa, who's the hot girl?" Gabe said. "I'm surrounded by hot girls. You'll have to be a little more specific." "What do you mean you're surrounded by hot girls? Did you not just see who I told you about?" "No, you went too fast." Gabe pointed his phone back up. "That is the Brianna Adams." He moved the phone slightly to the left. "That is Jeffy Keno Wallace." He moved it again. "That is Shelley Keno, and that is Angel, Shelley's friend, who, again, is married to my dad's boss." He pointed the phone back toward the pool. "That is Kimmy, Angel's daughter, and there," Peyton said, "that one in the pink bikini." "Oh, yeah, that is Taylor Keno, Ricky Keno's daughter." "Good grief, Gabe. That is one good-looking girl." "Yeah, she's hot," Gabe agreed. "Can you keep your voice down a little?" "Sorry, man. How old is she?" 16. "How perfect is that? You get into any of that?" "Will you shut up?" "And no, I haven't. You realize you're talking about a girl whose relatives are some of the most lethal people in the world." "So, they like you?" "Well, they wouldn't like me long if I were to, as you put it, get into that. Besides, she's never been interested. She has her eye on her cousin." Excuse me?" "Well, he's not really her cousin. He was adopted." "So she's with another guy." "Well, I mean, they're not together. He's older. He's in college. She's just a junior in high school, but last I heard, he was waiting for her to be 18. "That gives you time to make a move." Peyton, will you stop? Sure, but put the camera toward her one more time. Gabe did as requested. He had to admit, Taylor Keno was definitely the most beautiful girl he'd ever seen. With the DNA of Ricky Keno and Brianna Adams, how could you go wrong? She had long, dark brown hair, not straight, not curly, but with a slight wave to it. Her strong, athletic body was perfect in every way. Her face was as beautiful as her mother's. Her smile did something to his insides. She looked up, right at the camera, stood, came toward Gabe with that gorgeous smile in place, and leaned down close. Tell your friend he has a loud voice. Gabe closed his eyes in embarrassment, watched her walk into the pool house. Great, Peyton. Thanks a lot. Peyton laughed. Man, she is hot. And I got that on video. Gabe frowned. Hey, do not show that to anyone. I mean it. Oh, come on. This would go viral. I'm not kidding. Do not post that. Why not? It's the celeb thing. They don't like their personal life being made public. So, what happens if I do? You gonna beat me up? I won't have to. Did it register what I said to you about her family? I promise you don't want to make enemies of them, and if you ever want me to bring you out here, you better show me that I can trust you. I'm just messing with you, Gabe, and you don't have to use her family to scare me. I'm scared enough of you. Good. New scene. March 31st still. Sunday, late afternoon. Pine Forest Country Inn, Pine Forest, Georgia. You know, it wouldn't hurt to smile, Jody Apple whispered to her son as she passed by him on the way to grab more onion dip out of the kitchen. Oh, I thought I was smiling, he called after her. The party had been going on for a couple of hours now. Everyone in town, it seemed, had stopped by the inn after church to welcome Jake home from his first deployment. He'd endured hundreds of hugs, handshakes, and pats on the back. It wasn't that he wasn't grateful for their kindness and support, but there were so many it had become tedious. Everyone enjoyed their fill of the buffet prepared by his mom and Grams and Aunt Lisa and Aunt Lizzie and one of her twin daughters, Lily. Now they will all be getting into their suits and hit the pool. Jake decided now was a good time to sneak into the kitchen and get himself that last piece of apple pie that Grams had put away for him. In the large kitchen, he reached way into the back of the second refrigerator, and there it was, just where she said it would be. He unwrapped the plate, grabbed a fork, and headed back out to sit alone in the dining room. He was almost to the table when Lena, looking amazing in her bathing suit, came rushing past him. The plate went flying out of his hands and landed upside down on the floor. The girl turned and grinned. Oops, my bad, Lena said before she laughed and ran out of the room. He closed his eyes and begged for patience and went to get a broom and dustpan. He'd about had it with this girl. Whatever her problem is, he was getting to the point where he wasn't going to stay calm and just take it much longer. He cleaned up the mess and went to change into his bathing suit. He watched out the terrace doors as what seemed like the whole town of Pine Forest played in the giant pool or stood around talking and laughing. His parents sat with the Stewarts and the Tanners at one of the larger tables. At another, he saw the two sets of Anderson twins, who were also the Tanners, but had kept their biological father's last name. Both sets of twins were gorgeous blondes, looking very lovely in their bathing suits, he thought. He walked outside and over to greet them, since he hadn't had a chance to speak with them yet. The Tanners were their neighbors, and on the other side, Jake's father was responsible for bringing Keegan Tanner and his wife Lizzie down to Pine Forest. At the time, they had 5 daughters, 2 sets of twins and one a year older. Then they had Gabe, a great guy, and now they have a new little girl. The girls rose as he approached. Hey, Jake, they said in unison. He chuckled. Their twin stuff always made him laugh. Hey, Lily, Daisy, Violet, Rose, he said cautiously. They laughed. Don't worry, Rose said. You got it right. He shook his head. Well, at the risk of sounding like a player, you ladies are even more beautiful than I remember. Aw, aren't you sweet, Lily said. I wouldn't call it sweet, Rose put in. It's more like he's been surrounded by nothing but a bunch of smelly, rough men for the past year and a half. I wouldn't mind that, the usually quiet Daisy said, making everyone laugh. Each of the beautiful blondes took a moment to hug Jake and kiss his cheek and wishing him well and promising to get together sometime. He looked around and couldn't help but notice Lena, who was a standout with her long red hair, long legs, and athletic build. She was being boisterous and loud with a couple of girls that he didn't know. He was called over to the side of the pool by some old high school buddies who wanted to know about the training he'd been through. Lena watched Jacob Apple covertly, being all friendly and cozy with the twins. Not that she cared, really. The twins were her close friends of hers. The twins were close friends of hers. She'd known them as long as she could remember, and she knew they had no interest in Jake, or so she thought. Their parents and her parents were also close friends, since they lived on the dirt road, too. She called them Aunt Lizzie and Uncle Keegan. Her attention was drawn to Jake's handsome face. He still had some scabbing on his cheek where she'd scratched him. Despite the scratches, he was still impressive. His mother was of Asian descent. His father looked almost exactly like Lena's own father, golden blonde hair and dark brown eyes. They looked so much alike that people often made jokes about them being long-lost twin brothers. Jake had large brown eyes, light brown hair, beautiful lips, dimples. Looking at him, you'd never believe his mother was a petite Asian woman because Jake was tall and thick and banded with muscle. Her father was right. He somehow changed from a boy just out of high school into a trained Special Forces soldier. He looked like a man. He'd accomplished what many people could not. He was the youngest Marine Raider on record, and he made her so mad. He had no right to butt into her business. She wasn't even sure why his presence triggered such a strong reaction from her. She used to like him, but no longer. And there he stands, just daring her to do what she's about to do. She drew a breath, marched toward him. He looked up at her as she approached, a wary look in his eyes. She smiled sweetly at him and shoved. He came up from under the water, shaking his head at her. I bet you didn't see that coming, did you, Mr. Special Forces? The crowd laughed. Jake did too, to his credit. Jake watched the gorgeous redhead storm away. He had a mind to go after her and toss her into the pool, but he had no desire to grace her with a public wrestling match. Besides, he'd already learned that there was no way to subdue her without hurting her. It was the next day that almost brought things to a head. He'd parked his Indian Roadmaster and headed into the food mart. He came out just in time to see Lena kick the bike as she went by. Hey, he yelled sternly. She turned. Sorry. What is your problem? Whatever do you mean? You know exactly what I mean. What is your problem with me? And don't go kicking my bike. He turned and bent down to examine the bike to make sure she hadn't done real damage. Oh, I didn't hurt your little motorcycle, she said. Why would you even kick it in the first place? Really now, Lena, this has gone far enough. Whatever you think I did to you, tell me now. She raised her chin. Don't think you can order me around and I'll just comply like a good little soldier. He blew out a breath and softened. Come on now, Bugs. I thought we were friends. What's the deal? You thought we were friends? Ugh. She turned and stormed away. He watched her go, shook his head, strapped on his helmet, started the engine, and took off. New scene. It's April 1st, Monday morning, Alley Creek Shooting Range, Camp Pendleton, California. Daniel and Jeremy Davis showed out and did their father proud. Their form was good, stance perfect, aim not perfect, but getting there. They followed all the rules. Gabe only had to correct them a few times. The men all took time to praise them and tell them how proud they were of them, and more importantly, how proud their father would be. The boys, having unloaded their firearms and placed them down, backed away and removed their eye protection. Agent Nathaniel Hawk stepped up to congratulate the boys on a fine job and then helped Gabe pack up the boys' weapons and protective gear. Agent Hawk was assigned to take the boys home where their parents had just arrived. Grandmaster Kino bent down to speak with the boys. Hey guys, I just want you to know how proud I am of you, not just for your shooting here today, but for how you guys handled your mom and dad being in the hospital. You watched out for each other and you didn't argue with each other. Well, at least not too much. And you've been very polite to Mrs. Kino, which was the most important thing. The boy smiled. Will you tell all that to our dad? Daniel asked. Eric laughed. I might, but in exchange, you'll have to come back and visit again soon. That would be great, they said. Gabe gave the boys a hug. Well, I guess this is goodbye, guys, unless I can somehow get back to your house before I leave Saturday. Maybe the next time I'm out here, I can stay a little longer. Yeah, you know you got to come back. Dad is really not happy about the way the vacation went. I know. We'll make it happen. He turned to Agent Hawk. Would you like me to help get them loaded into the car? Nate smiled. Nah, we got this, don't we, guys? Yes, sir, they said in unison. Everyone took a moment to say goodbye and shake the boys' hands. Nate helped pick up the gun bag, and they took their leave. Okay, Gabe, Grandmaster Kino said. Your turn. Let's see what you got. Yes, sir, Gabe said, giving a mock salute. He pulled out his gun bag and laid his weapons, ammo, and magazines out on the counter and swung into action. 15 minutes later, Eric, Ricky, and young Eric stood, brows raised, amazed at the display of marksmanship they just witnessed. Joey and Mark, Adams, and Mark's two oldest, Jojo and Logan, stood the same way. They all looked to Joey, the only pro with them. What do you think? Ricky asked his youngest stepbrother. Joey grinned. I think he's freaking awesome. He reminds me of Jeff. Gabe smiled. Thank you, sir. Ricky glanced at his daughter. Taylor had surprised them all by asking if she could come with the guys to the shooting range. It surprised them because she'd never before shown any interest in shooting. Like everyone else, she wore eye and ear protection, and Ricky thought she looked absolutely adorable. He'd even shot a few pics of his beautiful daughter and sent them to Bree. Right now, she had a confused look on her face. What do you think, honey? Ricky asked. Gabe glanced over, interested to hear her response, and when she didn't answer, he moved toward her. Her eyes opened wide, and he smiled at her and pointed toward her head. She had on noise-canceling ear protection that allowed conversation, but the dial was turned all the way off. Her brow wrinkled. He reached up on her headphones and turned the small dial. Her eyes opened wide again, and she smiled. He turned back to Ricky with a grin. Ask her again. What do you think? Her father asked again, chuckling. I'm not sure. It looks complicated. Did he hit the target? Her cousins and brother laughed. Yeah, Jojo said with a chuckle. Every shot pretty much a bullseye. What he just did was extraordinary, Eric Sr. explained in his quiet voice. The others agreed quickly. Taylor smiled. All she knew was he looked very tough, firing off all those weapons in rapid succession, loading and reloading and unloading and clicking all kinds of switches and bolts like he knew what he was doing, which apparently he did. She looked him over. She'd known him a long time. She'd never really noticed before that he was pretty cute. At the pool yesterday with his shirt off, he looked like the rest of the guys in her family, ripped. Today, he had on jeans and a charcoal gray t-shirt, and he looked good, totally. He had dark hair and blue eyes and a dimple on one side. He glanced over in her direction, and she quickly turned her head. She watched as her brother, young Eric, and cousins, Jojo and Logan, ages 20, 20, and 19 respectively, all stepped forward to get their turns. Gabe moved back and stood nearby. Each of the guys laid out their guns and went through a lot of the same things that she'd just seen Gabe do. They were not quite as quick in doing those things and took a lot longer to aim. Young Eric's gun jammed, and Gabe stepped forward to help. He fixed the problem and stepped back again. Taylor asked him what the problem was, and he took time to explain it to her. Joey, Ameritech's number 2 in charge, who would one day take over the company, stepped forward to instruct and help the cousins. every once in a while asking for Gabe's thoughts and input, which made Gabe feel pretty darn good. When the cousins had their fill, they stepped back while Mark and Joey took their turn. The stepbrothers and brothers-in-law of Ricky Keno were very impressive, Gabe thought. Finally, Eric Sr. and Ricky stepped forward. Gabe thought they too were impressive. They each had a Glock, and they each were proficient with the firearm. Well, of course they were. The Kenos didn't do anything halfway. Eric turned to ask Gabe his thoughts on a few things, but Gabe realized he was just being kind. Mostly, Gabe stood next to Taylor and explained what everyone was doing as they did it. That's called a magazine. It holds the bullets. And he's holding the gun. It didn't fire because he forgot to take the safety off. Let's see. Let's start that paragraph over. That's called a magazine. It holds the bullets. He's unloading the gun. It didn't fire because he forgot to take the safety off. Joey stopped him because he didn't click the safety on. The bolt stays open when the mag is empty. Taylor would nod in understanding or ask another question, and when everyone was pretty much spent, they were surprised by Taylor's next question. Can I try? Ricky's brow shot up. The other men were silent. They all had an opinion, but this was her father's call. Gabe frowned and looked up at her father. You could run in and get her a .22 pistol. Ricky nodded and went inside the building. He came out a few minutes later with the gun and some ammo. I thought you can't buy a gun like right away, Taylor asked. Well, you definitely can't here in Cali, Gabe said, but he didn't buy it. He just borrowed it. Oh. Ricky handed the gun to Gabe. Here. Why don't you teach her? He offered. Gabe shrugged. Okay. He motioned Taylor forward. She stood next to him while he took time to teach her about the rules of gun safety and then explained all the working parts of the gun. He must have sufficiently warned her of all the dangers because when he tried to put the gun in her hand, she seemed afraid of it. He explained to her again how there were no bullets in the gun, pointing to the magazine which lay on the counter in front of them, and opening the slide to show the chamber empty. He held her hand and placed the gun in it. Never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot something, even if you know it's not loaded. He placed her finger along the side of the gun, avoiding the trigger. He then moved behind her and placed his hands over hers and showed her how to hold the gun. When she seemed nervous, he reminded her again that the gun was not loaded. Young Eric, Jojo, and Logan stood together watching. When Gabe had his arms pretty much around her and his cheek next to hers as he spoke to her, Eric and Jojo nodded at Logan. How does that make you feel? Logan smiled. He knew they were wondering if he was jealous, but they should also know that the feelings between himself and Taylor had always been one-sided. Relieved, he finally answered. Oh, that's what we thought, Jojo said. We just wanted to make sure nothing had changed, young Eric added. Hopefully, she's over her little infatuation with me, Logan said. Well, even if she is, it's not going to be pretty because, like, Gabe lives in Georgia. A lovesick teenage baby sister will probably not be fun to deal with, young Eric said. Jojo laughed. Probably. You know good and well, since she's been lovesick over Logan for the last 8 years. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Logan said. Don't jinx it. Just let it unfold and we'll see what happens. Agreed. Eric Sr., Ricky, Mark, and Joey also stood nearby watching and listening. They were impressed not only by Gabe's knowledge, but by his patience and natural teaching instinct. With Gabe's arm still around Taylor, he wedged his foot in between her feet. Widen your stance, he commanded. She did as instructed. Ricky shifted uncomfortably. Still, what was happening was exactly what he'd hoped would happen. Her fascination with Cousin Logan had gone on long enough, and it was time for his daughter to see that there were other fish in the sea. Gabe then showed Taylor how to sight the target, his lips close to her ear. Do you see what I mean? He asked. Yes, I think so. Okay, we're going to load up. Pick up the magazine with your left hand while you hold the gun in your right. She picked it up but couldn't get it to go in. Gabe pressed his lips together tightly to keep the laughter from slipping out. Um, Turn it around. The bullets have to point away from you. The cousins were not as successful at holding in their laughter, and she turned and glared at them. Gabe kicked her leg. Don't pay attention to anyone or anything other than what you're doing when you have a weapon in your hand. She drew a deep breath, blew it out, and nodded. Okay, put the magazine into the gun. She did. Let me have the gun, he said. He checked the magazine, ejected it. Do it again, and this time do it firmly to make sure it's locked in there. She did. Good job. Okay. The magazine is in the gun, but there has to be a bullet in the chamber, and I'm going to chamber it for you this time. Watch me. He took the gun from her, pulled the slide back, and chambered the bullet. So that means the gun is ready to fire. Almost. There's one more thing you have to do. Do you remember what that is? Switch off the safety. He smiled. Good. Go ahead and do that. I'm scared. He put his hands back on hers. I've got you. Do you trust me? Yes. Okay. Safety off. She accomplished it. Finger off the trigger, he reminded her. Oh, sorry. No problem. Everyone makes that mistake. We're going to start again. Safety on. She did. He took the gun, ejected the magazine, racked the slide to unchamber the weapon, put the bullet back into the mag, and laid them both down. Okay. Pick up the gun, insert the magazine. Good. Chamber the bullet. Good job, he said, surprise in his voice because she did it right, quickly and firmly on the first try. Finger off the trigger. Good. Okay, arms out. Good brace with your left hand. Good. Finger off the trigger. I keep forgetting. It's okay. It's a natural mistake. Okay, now line up the target in your sights. You got it? Got it. Safety off. Good. She lowered the gun. Is it going to, kick back? Safety on. Oh, yeah. She fumbled with getting the safety back on. We got this 22 because the bullet caliber is not as powerful. You're a strong girl. You'll barely feel the recoil. Trust me. I've got you. She nodded her head. Okay. So gun up. Good. But finger off the trigger. Good. Line up the shot. Good. Safety off. Now, you can put your finger on the trigger and shoot when you're ready. When she still didn't shoot, he used his hands to brace her upper arms. I'm right here. She pulled the trigger. The gun barely moved, and she sighed. I think I missed the whole target. No, you didn't. You hit the outside circle there. And now that you know how it feels, go ahead and squeeze off a few more. She did it. Good job. She turned with a big smile toward her father. Eyes front, Gabe commanded. Oops, sorry, she mumbled. Okay, now line up the target again and fire until you empty the magazine. She did as told. Okay, the mag is empty now. See? You can see into the chamber. See, there's no bullet there. Eject the mag. Good. Lay the magazine down and the pistol down. Good job. She turned, a giant smile on her face, and she ran to her father, and Ricky gave her a big hug. Everyone came forward and congratulated her. Young Eric pulled the target in. Look at that, Tay-Tay. You hit the center a few times. Great job, sis. Eric Sr. made his way to Gabriel and shook his hand. That was a superb show of your knowledge and ability to teach. A fine job indeed. Thank you, sir. I have to admit it was a little nerve-wracking teaching someone right in front of their family and not even being prepared. Well, the fact that you weren't prepared makes it that much more impressive. Taylor made her way back to Gabe. Hey, thanks for teaching me. That was fun. He nodded. What was he supposed to say? He figured it out quickly. Yep, no problem. Work on it, and next time I come to visit, we'll see how you do. I will. She raised up on her toes and kissed his cheek. Mouth agape, he watched her walk away. Jojo moved up and patted him on the back. You gonna go after that? Gabe turned and looked at Taylor's cousin, trying to figure out if he was serious. He wasn't sure how to answer. It could be a trick question. He could just be curious, or it could be a warning. Gabe glanced past Jojo to Logan, the cousin that everyone knew Taylor had her heart set on for years. Logan smiled. If it's my blessing you're looking for, you got it. Gabe still didn't know what to say. An arm suddenly had him in a headlock. It was young Eric, Taylor's brother. He leaned close. You have my blessing too, but don't hurt her. Then I'd have to kill you. Jojo and Logan laughed, and Gabe had a feeling it wasn't quite the joke they all pretended it was. He was beginning to think he'd be better off to steer clear of the gorgeous girl in question. Besides, he was leaving at the end of the week. They all headed back to the Keno estate. They ate lunch, swam in the ocean. A few of them broke out the surfboards, and when they grew bored of that, a volleyball game broke out. Gabe was glad to see that everyone was just as, or even more competitive than him. He'd played football and baseball all 4 years of high school. Football was over. He still had the last half of his season of baseball coming up. Right now, this volleyball game had become pretty serious. Taylor had elected to be on the same team he was on, and everyone kept spiking the ball right at her. She'd held her own pretty well. After all, she was a Keno. Still, a 20-year-old male spiking the ball at a 16-year-old girl seemed a little rough, and Gabe had to dive toward her a few times to rescue her. This last time, he pointed back at her brother in warning, and young Eric only laughed. He smacked it right at her again, and Taylor dove, got it. Joey set, and Gabe slammed the ball. They won the point and the game. Gabe helped Taylor up. Good job, he said. She smiled. You too. She was standing close to him, but before anything could get awkward, he turned and high-fived the rest of his team. He blew out a breath. It was weird, but Taylor's presence suddenly seemed to be affecting him. He suddenly seemed ultra aware of her. He pushed the feeling aside the best he could. They played until almost dinner time when everyone came in and showered and dressed and filed into the kitchen to see how they could help. The group filled 19 of the 24 places at the giant dining room table. Gabe sighed when Taylor found a seat right next to him. Not wanting to be rude, he smiled at her as she sat down. It wasn't that he didn't want the girl's attention, but he'd already decided her attention was not good for his health. Still, apparently, there was nothing he could do about it. He was looking forward to listening to the dinner conversation at the keynote table because it was always interesting and stimulating, and they didn't disappoint. They talked about young Eric deciding to put his college on hold and changing directions from NASA and astronaut candidate training. They talked about the next possible Mark candidates and whether any of the people at the table were interested in participating. They talked about the Keno challenges and the thought that this year might be Joey's last as the main contender. And they talked about the movie young Eric was shooting, with fight scenes choreographed by his father. As much as Gabe enjoyed the conversations, he also enjoyed the little things, like the interactions between the husbands and wives. These men were always so kind and loving to their wives, and the women were the same. They were all so beautiful and strong and intelligent. His own father and mother were just like these people. And the little ones, Mark's little girl and Joey's two little girls and baby boy, the kids were not afraid to speak and be heard. Jeffy and Cam weren't here, but if they had been, he was sure the conversation would be way over his head. Right now, they were talking about the slew of students they would have in the Keno studio classes this week because of spring break. Gabe would have thought the classes across the country would be empty because of spring break, but instead, people were taking the opportunity to get in extra classes. Of course, Gabe decided that here in California, at least, part of the reason for that was because the students knew that Ricky Keno would be randomly showing up in some of the classes. They all hoped to stand out enough to get to meet him. You are coming to our class in the morning, aren't you, Gabe? Gabe looked up at the silence. It was Grandmaster Keno who asked the question. He nodded. Yes, sir, I'm looking forward to it. He frowned. I didn't bring any uniforms with me. We have plenty, Shelley said. Great then, Eric said brightly. Then we'll all be here. It should be a fun day. April 2nd, early Tuesday morning, Pine Forest Country Inn, Pine Forest, Georgia. Just before dawn, Jake rolled out of bed. He was looking forward to his ride. He'd missed Santana just like he'd missed his parents, his friends, his hometown, and Graham's cooking. Jeans, boots, and a t-shirt, and he was ready to go. He hopped on his motorcycle and headed over to the Stewart Ranch, past the main house, hit the back road that led to the stables. He parked his bike and headed inside. Santana was not in his stall. He panicked for a second, looking around to see if he'd somehow unlatched his door and headed to the back corral. Then he heard the hoofbeats. He looked up to see Milena riding Santana toward the stable. What the hell? He strode out to meet her as she came to a halt. What do you think you're doing? She smiled. Good morning, Jake. Lovely day for a ride. I cannot believe you would have the audacity to take my horse out. Oh, were you going to ride him? You know I was. How could I know? She asked as she swung her leg over and dismounted. He moved close to her. Maybe because I've been over to ride him every single morning since I've been home. She backed up a few steps. Oh, well, sorry. Guess I wasn't thinking. Oh, right. You weren't thinking, just like you weren't thinking when you kicked my bike yesterday, or when you knocked my plate out of my hands, or pushed me into the pool, or tried to tear my freaking head off. Well, Elena, this is going to stop right now. I don't know what you think I've done to make you so mad at me, but of course you don't know, she yelled. Because you're an idiot, just like the rest of the guys I've ever dated. Yeah, you mean like the guy who was beating you up in the parking lot? And who else, huh? Is there someone else whose butt I need to kick? I don't need you to beat up anyone for me. I can do that myself. Well, that's evident, he said, stroking his cheek. Bugs, he said firmly. What is the problem? I don't understand. Like I said, you're an idiot, like every other guy I've ever dated. We've never dated, he yelled at her. She stood there, her mouth open, drawing in deep breaths. He looked into her eyes, and it dawned on him. They'd never dated. Suddenly, he understood. He moved forward so fast that she only had time to gasp. He grabbed her by the shoulders, pushed her up against the stable wall, and laid his mouth on hers. She struggled against him, but that only made him kiss her longer and harder, and finally he released her. She stood there, her breath heaving. He watched her for a moment, then moved forward and kissed her again, this time gentler. She pushed him away, hauled back, and slapped him as hard as she could. He stood there stone-faced, so she pulled back and slapped him again. Stop, he commanded. When she went to slap him a third time, he caught her arm and pulled her close. Stop it, Lena, he said softly. She tried to wrestle away, but he held her fast in his iron grip. Bugs, stop now. Stop. It was his soft tone that got her. She stopped struggling and let her head fall against his chest, and then the tears came. He wrapped both of his arms around her and held her tight as she cried. Okay, Lena, shh, it's okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Bugs. I get it now. I hurt you, didn't I? I hurt you, but I didn't mean to. You're right. I'm an idiot. After a few minutes, she quieted. He pulled her away just far enough so that he could see her face. Lena, can we talk? What is there to say? I've just completely humiliated myself. I pretty much want to go crawl in a hole somewhere and die. No, don't feel that way. I didn't understand. But maybe if we talk, I could understand. And maybe I can help you to see where my head's been the past several years. I didn't mean to hurt you, Bugs. Please. We need to talk. And I need to put Santana up. She nodded at that. Why did you kiss me? He knew it was a loaded question, because pretty much anything to do with Lena was loaded. He sighed. I'm sorry if that upset you. I had an overwhelming urge and I couldn't fight it. She smiled. Really? Inwardly, he sighed in relief. Apparently, his answer was acceptable. It was also the truth. Yes, really. As a matter of fact, he said as he moved close again, I think I need to do it again. He didn't give her a chance to say yay or nay. He simply took her face in his hands and kissed her, gently at first, and then a little more passionately. This time she put her arms around his neck and kissed him back. She sighed. He moaned. "What's going on here?" Chaz Stewart barked. Jake jumped away from Lena. He rubbed his hands on his jeans and backed up even farther. Sorry, Uncle Chaz. I was just, I need to put Santana up." Quickly, he grabbed the horse's reins and pulled him into his stall. Chaz pointed at Lena. "You, back to the house." "But Daddy, don't but Daddy me. Go." She looked over at Jake and had to smile at the look of dread on his face. Shrugging, she giggled and walked off. Jake drew himself up and swallowed hard. He was a Marine Raider. Take it like a man, he thought. Chaz stood there looking over the guy who'd just been all over his daughter. He was a good kid, well, young man, and Chaz had been hoping that they would see the light and get together. Still, he had to play the part of protective father, and honestly, he also didn't want them taking things too fast. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Chaz asked. Jake swallowed and cleared his throat. "To be honest, sir, I'm not quite sure." "Well, you'd better get sure real quick." Jake nodded. You know she's been riding me pretty hard. I couldn't figure out what her problem was with me. I thought we'd always been good friends. As it turns out, I think that was the problem." "That you were friends?" "Well, yeah, and she wanted our relationship to be more than that, I think." Chaz nodded. "She made a comment the other day about someone not appreciating her for the great person she is. I'm thinking she was talking about you." "But that's not how it is at all, Uncle Chaz. I mean, who wouldn't appreciate a hot, I mean, a beautiful girl like Lena? And she's brilliant and feisty and tough." Chaz stood there waiting. When Jake didn't go on, Chaz waved his hand in a circle. "And?" Jake's mind scrambled. "And, well, I mean, I was definitely interested. I have been for a long time, and I knew she had, like, a crush on me. But what was I supposed to do, Uncle Chaz? I mean, I knew I was going into the Marines as soon as I graduated high school. I knew I was going directly into Raider training. I had no idea how long it would take me. Was I supposed to, like, claim her for my own and then just leave her? Didn't seem right. So I pretty much ignored my feelings for her and focused on what I needed to do to go after my own goals. But ignoring my own feelings also meant I ignored her feelings, and apparently I hurt her pretty bad. I'm guessing she started out hurt, and then I came home and interfered with her and her boyfriend, and she went from hurt to mad real fast. Like, I didn't want anything to do with her. How dare I come home and insert myself into her life? And she's right. It's not fair. But, you know, I couldn't come home and see some guy hurting her and simply look the other way. No, you couldn't. You did the right thing. I get it. But she didn't look too mad just now. Well, things kind of came to a head, and I just sort of took matters into my own hands, and I kissed her. I'm sorry, sir, but it seemed to do the trick as far as her not being mad anymore, at least for now." Chaz nodded. "I can't believe she'd let you kiss her." Jake blew out a breath and shifted uncomfortably and rubbed his cheek. "Well, no, sir, she didn't actually let me. I mean, not at first. It kind of took her by surprise, and she fought me." Chaz's brows rose. Jake rubbed his cheek. "She smacked me a few times, but she finally realized it was what she wanted." He glanced up at his uncle. I don't mean that like it sounds." Chaz smiled. "Yes, you do. The first time I kissed her mother, it was pretty much the same, in that she didn't know at first that it was exactly what she wanted." Jake blew out a relieved breath. "So what now?" Chaz asked. Jake shrugged. "I don't know. I mean, nothing's changed. I still will have to leave again. Am I supposed to get together with her and then just leave her? I don't know what to do." "Well, she has a brain." I know that. Then you talk it over with her and let her decide what she wants and what she wants to do about what she wants. Jake nodded. I just want to know that your intentions are honorable. Jake nodded again. That means no rolling around in the hay. Roger that, Jake said. Chaz nodded. Okay, then. He drew a breath. By the way, different subject. If Lena decides to press charges against this Brett guy, she'll need you as her witness. Any problem with that? No, sir, no problem at all. Chaz started to leave and then stopped. Don't forget to brush that horse. No, sir, I won't. You know, Lena is the one who's taken care of Santana for you pretty much every day you've been gone. Jake frowned. No, sir, I didn't know that. Well, a little appreciation might go a long way. Jake nodded again. Copy that. And that is the end of chapter 4.